My name is Dr. Nevena Martinovic, and I'm an educational developer at the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I have the great pleasure of welcoming you to our inaugural lecture in the new Last Lecture series. So, what we're hoping will be the first of many to come. To begin, let's acknowledge that Queen's University is situated on the territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It's also to acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous people who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today. As educators, we don't stop at opening our sessions and courses with land acknowledgements, but engage in ongoing work to disrupt the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism in our teaching practices. Queen's commitments to this work can be found in our 2016 Extending the Rafters report. And during Teaching and Learning Month, I invite everyone here to consider how they're implementing its recommendations in their teaching spaces and practices. One recommendation we can all enact, regardless of our specific academic positions, is number 21, working to thoroughly integrate Indigenous knowledge into curricula across academic programs. I now want to introduce the Last Lecture series. The Last Lecture format originated at Carnegie Mellon with a presentation by Dr. Randy Pausch following his diagnosis with terminal pancreatic cancer. That lecture inspired universities around the world to invite celebrated teachers to consider what message they would want to share with their peers and future educators, and then deliver that wisdom through their personal pedagogical style. The Last Lecture series also serves to remind us that the lecture is a pedagogical tool as significant in our teaching toolkits as flipped classrooms and in-class active learning activities. Crafting lectures is an art and science of its own, and we can learn from the generosity of the Last Lecture presenters who share their work with us. In our earliest conversations with Dr. Eleanor MacDonald, we asked, if you could design your ideal final lecture, what wisdom would you like to impart? Before we get to our guest of honor, I would like to invite Dr. Jonathan Rose, professor and head of the Department of Political Studies, to do an introduction to Dr. MacDonald.
As was just announced, my name is Jonathan Rose. I'm head of political studies, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce a longtime friend and colleague in the department, Eleanor MacDonald. And I think as the inaugural lector, there's probably no one who better embodies the importance of teaching in a university than Eleanor. Incidentally, I came into this room, as all of you did, looking at this text on the blackboard, and I thought this is kind of emblematic of Eleanor. It's inscrutable. I don't know what it means. It's enticing. It's alluring. And it says a lot about, I think, Eleanor's teaching style, to just give a little bit to keep students engaged, which is what Eleanor always does. So the title of today's talk reflects Eleanor's preoccupation of using the classroom to create a space that is indeed fully human, and that honors our collective commitment to social justice, that same commitment they show to social justice in their personal life. Eleanor's commitment to pedagogical excellence is evident by a quick glance from her CV. Multiple teaching award winner, multiple winner for the Frank Knox Teaching Award, and finalist for TVO's Best Lecturer. Students have praised Eleanor for being a fantastic professor, but also an amazing supervisor. Let me quote one, Josh McAvoy. Josh writes that few are more intellectually curious and sharp in critique, while equally compassionate and kind. Important word. Studying with Eleanor helps hone the intellect and provides nutrition for the will to pursue the truth in the service of emancipatory change. As a scholar, Eleanor embodies the adage that to be radical is to grasp things by the root. Clearly an accomplished professor in the classroom, but also a very versatile one, Eleanor's area of expertise is contemporary political theory. But though they've taught a number of courses, including our first year course, our core political theory course, and courses on culture, gender and identity politics, Marxism, and most recently, critiques of capitalism. As a professor getting a bit late in my age, I know that it's often easy to fall on the temptation to resort on doing what is comfortable in the classroom. We may not feel the reason to innovate because, after all, we've done this before. And I can say Eleanor is a rare colleague who's never content to rest on what has been successful. Eleanor is always thinking about innovations that better resonates with students. And let me give you an example. In their last year of teaching, Eleanor, in their Critique of Capitalism course, created an online museum of capitalism where students reflect, write, and post an object in our everyday life using the triptych of consume, utilize, and associate. It's a testament to what I call the gee whiz moment of teaching, that light bulb moment when students have the realization of how materials fit together and it all makes sense. I've heard from many of Eleanor's students that this class was transformative. This project and the way Eleanor taught about the subject helped them learn, but more importantly, it had an impact well beyond a third-year university class. In short, and let me conclude, this course, like all of Eleanor MacDonald's teaching, helps students to think about, I dare say, being fully human. Please welcome me and join me, Eleanor MacDonald.
Sorry to interrupt. We actually weren't able to fully capture Eleanor with one introducer. So we also have Dr. Dan Vina.
I'm sorry, I'm not Eleanor. I'm so sorry. I know, like this is such a bummer for you, but okay, here we go. Second intro. Hello all, my name is Dan Vena. I'm a continuing adjunct member in the Department of Film and Media and a former student of Eleanor's both at the MA and PhD level. I speak today of my own experiences as a student and as someone who continues to receive guidance and mentorship from Eleanor, but I am confident that my experiences are not singular. I had the good fortune of meeting Eleanor back in 2011. I was fresh out of undergrad and newly transplanted to Kingston. Immediately upon indicating my research interest in trans studies, I was told, quote, "You need to meet Eleanor." Those simple words have proved to be life-changing, and I assure you, I am not exaggerating. After an initial meeting, which I recall going pretty well, like for the most part, Eleanor agreed to serve as a second reader for my MA. However, through a series of circumstances, Eleanor increasingly took on more of the supervisory duties. The first gift I received, and a staple offering in Eleanor's repertoire, going above and beyond the call of duty to offer intellectual support, professional guidance, and compassionate connection. Over the next 2 years, Eleanor guided me through my MA research in trans studies, introducing me to key figures in the field and sharing community history regarding, I don't know, like which BDSM butch transitioned and when, thinking of Pat Khalifa, and like how everybody saw it coming. So we would swap those kinds of stories. There was a long list, I assure you, of those. Through these conversations, Eleanor gifted me with trans ancestry and lineage. The trans authors we chatted about in those meetings represented an intellectual and cultural community of days gone by, but one I so yearned to be in contact with. The second gift Eleanor offered, connection. Eleanor's talent for storytelling and recollection allowed for what historian Carolyn Dinshaw has described as a touch across time. Through Eleanor's teachings, I connected with myself and my community. Fast forward a bit, and I was beginning my PhD. I had decided to stay at Queen's in the Cultural Studies program, one Eleanor helped shape, due in part to the prospect of continuing our work together. But what that work was, admittedly seemed elusive. The third gift Eleanor gave me, tremendous patience. As someone who now supervises PhD students of his own, I am at a loss to truly describe how much patience and goodwill Eleanor showed me as I bounced from topic to topic to topic. I perhaps took Eleanor's call to foster a life of the mind a bit too liberally and bubbled over with ideas. No direction, but ideas nonetheless. Throughout these years of searching and eventually writing the dissertation, Eleanor stayed in my corner, continually reminding me of my capabilities, believing in my capacities as an intellectual, and guiding me, again, it should be underscored, with utmost patience across the finish line. The degree to which Eleanor offered her talents is hard to communicate in words. I know it as a visceral, embodied sense of gratitude that manifests as a magnetic need to pay it forward. And just as a token of appreciation, that dissertation has now become my first little monograph, and I was gonna just thanks. And Eleanor is the first to be thanked in the acknowledgments, I assure you. So to conclude, when I grow up someday, I strive to be just like Eleanor. For me, she represents the very best of what our roles as intellectuals and educators offer, nurturing yet always provoking greater criticality and self-awareness, a kind way to say she never lets you rest on your laurels or win an argument too easily, building bridges within and across communities to strengthen the power of the collective, and ever modeling that no work, political or intellectual, can be done without kindness and compassion, all traits needed today in an increasingly daunting political era and growing austerity measures within the university system. And now for the formal introduction. Eleanor MacDonald arrived at Queen's in 1990 as a Webster postdoctoral fellow. In 1993, she joined the Department of Political Studies as a member of the faculty and subsequently was cross-appointed to both the Department of Gender Studies and the graduate program in Cultural Studies. From 2004 to 2007, she served as the Associate Dean of Graduate Studies. In 1994, MacDonald was a visiting scholar in the School of Political Economy at Carleton University, and in 2010 was a visiting scholar at the Center for Canadian Studies at the University of Edinburgh. The focus of MacDonald's research and teaching is in contemporary political theory. She has written on identity politics and the political implications of postmodern and post-structuralist theory. In 2012, MacDonald received the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance Award for Excellence in Teaching. She received the Arts and Science Undergraduate Society Teaching Award in 1991 and was one of the 4 finalists for the Alumni Teaching Award in 2025. In 2010, she was one of the 10 finalists in the TVO Best Lecturer competition. During this career, MacDonald was also engaged in a variety of types of service to the university, including Department Head of Political Studies, CUFA Executive Member, and member of the Collective Bargaining Team, faculty member of Senate, and Special Advisor to the Human Rights Office. For the last 2 years before retiring, Eleanor has also been heavily involved in the Queen's Coalition Against Austerity. Welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you, everyone. I'll put this up. The title is No More Chainsaws. Probably nothing better speaks to the diversity of my teaching expertise. I know nothing about horror cinema, and yet I somehow managed to supervise a publishable dissertation on trans readings of and feminist criticism of women's horror cinema. Go figure. I want to start by thanking Dan and thanking Jonathan for their generous and kind intros. I am much daunted, intimidated really to follow that. I also want to thank the Center for Teaching and Learning In particular, I want to thank the organizers for today. Oh, am I not? The problem is this is probably going to come up. Oh, well, maybe it doesn't have to. How's that? Can you hear me now? Better? Better. Do I need to thank Dan and Jonathan again? Thank you again. And thank you where I was. Thank you to the CTL in particular. I would like to thank the organizers of this event, Dr. Nevena Martinovic, Yasmin Dirbal, and Mervish Rather. And anyone else who who was involved. I also want to thank you for coming. When I first met with Nevena and Yasmin and they asked me to do this and we talked about the timing of it and they said they wanted it to be in early May, my reaction was, well, that's fine because no one will be there. I know what May feels like. I know that you've all just handed in your grades. I know that you'd like to get to your own work or your gardens. But you've proven me wrong, and thank you very much for coming. I'm very honored to see all of you here today. Before I really get going, I also want to dedicate this lecture to a friend, a neighbor, Paul Kelly, died yesterday. Many of you may know his partner, his wife, Dr. Susan Lord. His death was sudden, and Paul was a poet and a philosopher, an intellectual, a fierce debater, a very good friend to many people, including people who are here today. And I want to acknowledge that and say that as I'm lecturing today, I'm thinking of him. I hope Paul would have liked what I have to say. Okay, so this series, I also just want to say is I'm very happy that it's taking place because I think that for a while now, lecturing as a form of teaching has been quite denigrated, unfairly. It's not my argument that it's better than seminars or supervision or flipped class. Well, maybe flipped classrooms I might take issue with. I've had a long-standing concern about that. There have been, I think, these two contradictory trends for the last, 15, 20 years in teaching. And one of them has been to degrade or to denigrate lecturing, to characterize it as problematic, to move away from it towards the so-called flipped classroom in which the lecturer goes somewhere and looks at a screen and records a lecture, and then somewhere over there, some students actually sit and watch a screen and listen to the lecture, and that somehow through that, they feel a connection that is inspiring enough that the student will then go to a classroom and then actually feel confident in asking questions. And I think something's lost in the process, and there's something to be said, as the musical says, for being in the room where it happens, that there's a kind of a magic to it. And so what I wanted to do today was to explore that magic. The other trend, of course, is that you are increasingly being required to lecture as class sizes get larger. So at the one hand, you're being told this is not really the best way of doing things. And on the other hand, here are your 200 students. Good luck, and try and do that in any different way. So a lot of what I want to do today in this lecture is actually honor what happens in the lecturing space. In thinking about today's lecture and imagining what might be here, despite it being May, I mostly imagine you, the audience, as teachers, as lecturers, as people who perhaps have organized lots of your life around supporting or being in classroom spaces with students. And I'm hopeful that you'll come out of here with a sense of recognition of the importance of the work that you do. So that's one objective for today. A second objective arose when I began to think what it meant to lecture about lecturing. And that came from this realization that while I have reflected a lot over the last many decades about what I did as a lecturer, it isn't really my area of expertise. My area of expertise is actually political theory, as the introducers suggested. The last lecture format, as Randy Pausch used it and as others have subsequently, imagine that people would lecture, they're offered their final lecture on a topic in their area of expertise. So for me, that's not pedagogy, it's not lecturing, but it's political theory. So in order to try to stay in my lane, I'm going to share my reflections on teaching through political theory. The final objective related to the above is to use these frameworks not only to think about teaching and lecturing, but also to think a little bit about the times in which we are working. Teaching is, I think, a hopeful act. You hope that what you have to say will actually be useful to the people who are hearing it. You teach about what you know, but I think you also find the limits of what you teach in what you know, like the limits of what you know and what you teach. So teaching can be a bit unnerving. It can be a kind of a vulnerable act. You're up there, you're saying what you know, but you're also like, every time you do this, you're kind of running into something that you don't know. And if you're teaching, you're probably aware of that. So here's the plan. I will introduce you to 3 theoretical frameworks. You're going to all come away with some political theory today. And I'm going to talk about how each of those political frameworks has helped me to reflect on what I do when I lecture. And perhaps it will help you think a little bit about what you do when you lecture as well. So so each of these is going to be introduced by just saying a few words about it. And then for each of them, I'm actually going to give you 2 insights. Then I'm going to throw in 1 more at the end. Okay, when I was, the first one, political economy. When I was a graduate student, I was reading Karl Marx, and I came across a quotation of his that I just thought was so amazing. It was like poetry when I came across it. And it's in the 1844 manuscripts. What that means is that Marx was 26 when he wrote this. And he wrote something, and it begins, supposing we had produced as fully human. And it stopped me in my tracks. Well, what would that mean? And he goes on to say, each of us would have, in 2 ways, affirmed themselves and the other person. I'm going to paraphrase from here because the language gets a bit esoteric. But he says, in producing, I would be kind of embodying myself, putting my essence into what I produce. And in receiving my production, I would be responding to a need in you. And that would affirm something about you, your human needs. And in receiving that, you would also be recognizing me as a human who is capable of meeting your need. He concludes by saying, in the individual expression of my life, I would have directly created your expression of your life. And therefore, in my individual activity, I would have directly confirmed and realized my true nature, my human nature, my communal nature. Our products would be so many mirrors in which we saw reflected our essential nature. This relationship would moreover be reciprocal. What occurs on my side also has to occur on yours. It's poetry, really. And there's the 26-year-old Marx thinking about production and thinking about the obstacles to production that are created in a society that is not organized around producing for people's needs. It's not organized around acknowledging the productive capacities that we have as essential or integral to our humanity. And so in this very idealistic passage, he's proposing that there are other ways that society could be organized, that production could be organized. It could be organized in ways that recognize the humanity of the producers, and it could be organized in ways that recognize that we are all humans who need. So what I take from that as a lecturer is, and I've used this in a few different ways in my life, but imagine we lectured as fully human. Imagine that entering lecture spaces, and I think you probably do this, preparing the lecture, you think about what it means to try and teach that subject. What do they need to know? What does my particular background give me such that I can share that with my students? This stage of Marx's life, his career, is often referred to as his humanist stage. And Marx goes on in this to talk about alienation or estrangement. He talks about the ways in which under capitalism we're estranged from our own labor, from each other, as workers who are just competing for jobs, from nature, which just turns into a resource to be used for profit, from the product that we produce, it belongs to someone else. And I feel for all of you who are producing courses that are going to be taught by other people, or the ways in which your own intellectual labor gets captured and used for other purposes. So lecturing, however, I think has been for me one of the most fundamentally fully human things that I've been able to do. And it's something that I think, if we're thinking about what Marx has to offer here, political economy, I'm just going to do it this way. If we think about Marx, one of his first insights from the humanist part of his work is to talk about who we are as creative, as resourceful, as fundamentally social, and as responsive to, sorry about the writing, responsive to each other's needs. The second, sorry, there was one other thing I want to throw in here. If I have a worry about this lecture, I'll just share it with you. I am worried that I have too much material. So I'm gonna, it always happens. And you know, if you were actually my class, we would just like, I just like say, okay, I'll finish this next time, but I only have you for right now. Okay, so I did want to throw in this. There's an American cognitive neuroscientist and educator who wrote a book called Digital Delusions. And I was listening to a talk he gave on it. And he said, you know, as humans, we are fundamentally wired to be taught by humans. I mean, I don't know about the sociobiology of it, but I think that he's on to something there. Like, that we learn better when we learn by humans. And the studies that he's done have shown that wherever technology is introduced as the primary force within classrooms, cognitive abilities of students just go down. That on every measure, memory, attention, even IQ, literally executive functioning, literacy, numeracy, the generation that has been largely schooled on and through technology, on all measures, is doing less well than every generation before it that's been measured. Okay, let me just move to, Marx's reputation is less as a philosopher and more as an economist. You probably know that. His humanist tendencies never went away, in my view, but they gave way to a critique of capitalism that focused more on the structural forces that lead us to where we are right now. Marx predicted much of what we now see in our world, a sharp increase in inequality, a small number of people growing massively wealthy. Their massive wealth. I love this. Billie Eilish, was at some conference with her, and she's like talking to billionaires, and she said, "Why are you billionaires?" And it's like, people are billionaires because they are accruing surplus, the profits that are being made by workers. That's basically Marxism in a sentence. That the way in which wealth works in our society is that those who own capital employ those who don't, and the value of what they produce is then owned by the producers of capital, who will do anything to expand their wealth. And that means further exploitation of those workers. It means exploitation of the environment. It means war. Okay, I've left the text. So Marx predicted much of what we see: the spread of capitalism across the growth of an industrial reserve army. That means masses of people unemployed, the increased precarity of capitalism. In a stunning passage too, and I think it's in the 3rd volume of Capital where I came across it, where he's just got this paragraph about like how debt is going to become a huge force in capitalism as wealth is loaned out for the purpose of making wealth that is more and more precarious to make. And so we see things like the housing bubble, which, again, caused the most harm to those who are the most marginalized. What I will say is that until fairly recently, we were largely protected in the university from the forces of political economy. That this structuralist critique that Marx had of capitalism, the university seemed to be this kind of enclave in which we could just go on doing what we've done since feudal times, really, with our robes, every now and again we get them out. And we have a kind of sense that what we're doing does not have to bend to the forces of the economy. What we're seeing now is that's no longer the case, and that universities are increasingly, they have been for a while, but they are increasingly geared towards ensuring that students are being positioned to be good workers in that economy, and that the things that are being studied are in an obvious way going to benefit the expansion of capital. We're seeing our work as educators being altered by the same kinds of production processes that have for a couple of centuries characterized industrial production. Economies of scale, standardization of product lines, increased efficiencies, technological replacement of workers, and the production of a reserve army of labor. Instrumentalization of knowledge, that is, the gearing of intellectual work towards support for maximizing the profitability of capital investment. So that means largely supporting the STEM disciplines, alongside diminished support for the humanities and social sciences, whose profit orientation is less certain and whose tendencies towards social critique are actually seen as counterproductive. Imagine that. Rather than serving the public good, as many universities have understood their mission, university education is increasingly understood as a site of advanced job training and research development to assist the growth of capital, even when that growth of capital is neither publicly shared nor environmentally safe. Students come to understand themselves in this system as consumers who are purchasing a degree, initially by putting their courses in shopping baskets, and also by choosing universities based on reputational rankings. Thank you. Always happens in every lecture. There's a helpful person. So, I mean, again, and this repeats a little bit of what I said before, but we can see the demand for standardization in our courses. The courses are supposed to follow specific kinds of formats, that they are easily reproducible, and that you as a lecturer are fungible, interchangeable You can just like be dropped in. Somebody else can teach contemporary critiques of capital, you know, and that they'll do it, you know, perhaps using a syllabus that they didn't invent, perhaps, you know, even against their own beliefs or judgments. Whole fields of knowledge and expertise are neglected or abandoned if they are deemed irrelevant to the expansion of capital, while the value of other disciplines are inflated because of the expectation that they will facilitate the production of research. So the point here is that to lecture as fully human, to me, has meant to resist that. It's meant to be forthright about the value of what I think I do and what many of you do. It's to be aware of the importance of critique, of presenting in as clear as possible a way the truth of how the economy functions and the effects that it's having on our lives. And so I've been fortunate in my career to be where I am and to be given courses or create courses that do this in the realms of cultural politics, environmental politics, critiques of capitalism, identity politics, critiques of ideologies, and the blessed first year course. Don't know. So to lecture as fully human is also to acknowledge the ways in which historical, economic, and social conditions are affecting the university in ways that prevent us from doing our jobs well, in ways that, you know, I was thinking about this in terms of things like the board of trustees. The board of trustees here is almost entirely made up of people who have backgrounds in finance and banking. Or like, where are the people on that board who represent the community, who represent the the housing crisis, or who represent the environmental concerns? So, like, this is a shift that needs to take place in terms of how we understand our mission. Okay, so the structuralist critique focus on context, and as a lecturer, it focuses for me on questions around resistance and critique. So I hate PowerPoint, so you have to bear with me. I'm always jealous of my PowerPoint, by the way. Like, if I do have a PowerPoint, I think, why are they looking at that? I'm here. Come on. Okay, so let's move on. We have political economy with its humanist, looking at response to need. We have resistance and critique. And I want to move to a different body of thought. I want to talk about psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis offers a whole different world to think about. It says that, in fact, what's happening in the classroom is like what's happening in every other space in society. We are not just rational. In fact, most of us is not rational at all. Most of us is deeply affected and influenced by drives, emotions, things that happened in our past that continue to affect the way in which we relate to each other today. Psychoanalysis says we can try and figure out that, but that'll be work to figure it out. It'll be work to figure out why you have the responses you do to other people. It'll be work to figure out what associations are at work in your mind. And psychoanalysis is also, to a degree, about taking care of that, about being responsible for that. The first thing I want to talk about then is that the classroom itself is likely to be a site where there's emotions taking place. One of the ways in which lecturing has been kind of denigrated has been this kind of catchy, cute phrase, like, you don't want to be the sage on the stage. You want to be the guide at their side, right? Well, great. The guide at their side is like a kind of a kind figure, and the sage on the stage is kind of remote and probably not relatable or something like that. I think that both are important. I think that actually there's nothing wrong with knowing and being somebody who people can learn from. And I think that if there is a kind of an aura that happens, like a kind of celebrity aura around you, the key thing there is not to deny it. It's to treat that with the kind of humility and responsibility that that position deserves. Ages ago, I had a graduate student who came to me, who was about to teach his very first lecture, and he was very nervous. He had his first lecture course. He was like a fourth year PhD or something. And I said to him, it has nothing to do with you. Like, don't be nervous. Like, it absolutely, this is not about you. It's about what you're teaching. Like, you just are the conduit. I think I gave him this example. Forgive me. I said, think of Vanna White. You just know where all the letters are, right? You're just going to turn them over. Maybe somebody's going to buy a vowel. You know, they're going to show some interest. And so you're just there to help them see something else. And if that's how you're using your power, that kind of power that you have by virtue of the associations that are being made around you with authority or whatever, the key thing you can do is be the kind of authority that you think people should be. Psychoanalytic theory, I'm going to talk about two sort of streams of it, and one of them has to do with this question of desire and emotions. And the thing I want to talk about in part there is the responsibility that we have. When Freud wrote what he wrote, and with all these insights, and I know that there's tons there to critique, one of the directions that went in was a huge area of intellectual study into how those associations work, and into language, into signs, into symbols, into imagery, and what is effective. How do we make these associations? In my cultural politics class, we talk about this in relation to the way in which it emerged in advertising. Okay, so advertising became as powerful as advertising has become because it played on knowledge of how these associations work, right? What represents something else. So you can get more people to smoke if you use the Marlboro ad and like get them to associate it with freedom, horses. I don't know. Didn't work for me. But you can get people to buy more ice cream, apparently, if you associate ice cream, very hard to sell in the winter, with comfort. And so ice cream sundaes began, where the sundae was shaped, this is embarrassing, but like a breast, and associated with comfort. Weird, eh? But apparently real. And so that way also has emerged with political propaganda. The billions of dollars that are being spent to get you to buy stuff and to get you to believe stuff. To believe that Stephen Harper, when he put on his like nice little avuncular sweater vest, was a benign character that nobody needed to be afraid of, you know? And we see it all the time. And so again, like your job is to use the tools that you have, the desire that people will have to learn in order to get them to learn. And part of how you do that, I also think, and I'm sure you do this, is by sharing your own desire. You are studying what you studied and you became an expert in what you became an expert in because it excited you. I don't know why. Some of you are studying stuff I don't know. But like you got excited about it. And so part of what you're also doing in that position of authority is sharing your own desire. The second thing that I want to take from psychoanalysis is quite different. And that is that psychoanalysis, one of the streams had to do with like, you know, how does advertising work? How does language work? What are the associations that are going on such that, you know, stereotypes persist in society? It's powerful work by Stuart Hall on race as a signifier to talk about how racism persists. But a whole other area of psychoanalytic theory focused more on care, on healing. Freud was a scientist, but he also believed that what he did when he was listening to people and listening to their stories was uncover underlying trauma. So I also want to say that the classroom is a site of, or at least it's a site of crisis, that we're taught, we think that learning is going to happen like that. But in fact, on the way from here to here, sometimes you lose everything. Sometimes the whole thing falls apart, right? In ancient political theory, Plato, oh, my board's falling apart. Plato talked about how in order to get from one stage of reasoning to the next, a higher level of reasoning, you had to go through what he called, the Greek word is aporia or aporia, this aporetic moment in which you reach paradoxes. You no longer know what you think. You have all written stuff. You think you know what you're going to say. And then it all falls apart. And I mention this because I think that part of what we do as teachers, as lecturers, is we hold that moment. We, in creating a course, set a struggle for our students. We want them to get to somewhere. And we know that it isn't always, despite the best kind of Excel spreadsheets that you might create around like what, or, you know, like all the stuff we're supposed to do now about like listing the 6 things people are supposed to learn in the course and then figuring out how they're supposed to learn them and how we're going to measure whether they've learned them. It's kind of bizarre, really, because you know that what happens is that learning happens often in these leaps, and often you don't know what your students are learning. They actually might learn something that you didn't intend. They might read something in one of your readings that you didn't see there. They might bring something of their own desires or needs to it that is quite unexpected. But I think that what we do in lecturing is we create an environment in which it is possible for people to feel respected as they go through that, right? That you can't do that in, you can't do that without working hard in a lecture to establish connections to people in the classroom, without paying attention, without looking at people in the eye, without like trying to figure out what's going on for them. And knowing that not all the good questions are going to be asked, that people will be sitting there wondering, okay, I really have left the text. Yeah, so again, I think the thing that I wanted to emphasize there is also this notion of responsibility, but also of a kind of a capacity to relate to that, a kind of a relationality of relating to relationality, of relating to what it means to learn something, and to try and create a context in which that can happen, in which students feel like you acknowledge that. There's a children's storybook that in which the mother is a monster. I always related. It turns out her little boy is a monster too. And the mother says to the little boy, always use your powers for good, never for evil. And I think that's really the power that you have to attract, to share your knowledge, and then the capacity to understand that will affect people. Okay, and now I want to talk about critical theory. Critical theory is a body of thought. I'm just going to that's associated with the Frankfurt School. Okay, so this whole section of the board was supposed to be Freud and Marx. It was good in my head, but I'm going to just let you imagine that that's there, and then I'm going to talk about critical theory. And the figure I want to focus on in critical theory is Adorno. And Theodor Adorno was a member of the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School for social research, all of the members of it either were fired from their jobs, and during the Holocaust, some did not survive. Adorno's close friend, Walter Benjamin, was one. He did not survive. But they were very interested in fascism. They were very interested in authoritarianism. And Adorno was a musicologist, but he was also a philosopher. And his work kind of combines elements of both political economy and psychoanalysis, as well as other theorists like Kant and Nietzsche. But I want to take two aspects of Adorno's thought and talk about them. And the jumping off point here was that part about like the crisis in knowledge, and what it often leads to is actually experiencing the world a little differently. The first insight I want to draw from his work is what he referred to as the preponderance of the object. And what he means by that is that we are raised in the West, at least. And he talked about this in his book that he co-authored with Max Horkheimer. We're raised to believe in Enlightenment rationality. And Enlightenment rationality suggests that we can use reason to understand things. In fact, it goes further than that. It says we can use reason to understand everything. Our reason is capable of actually mastering the world. If you just put enough things in front of it and you reason hard enough, you will actually come to understand it all. And so there's this progress of knowledge, but alongside it, Adorno suggests there's kind of a myth that's taking place. This isn't reason. We've done something funny here. We've put ourselves at the center. We've put our minds at the center, as if all there is to know and understand could be understood in terms of things like causality. Causality is great. I don't knock it. But there are resonances that co-causalities, and there's qualities in the world that go beyond what we can know. And I think that leads that view, and the reason he talks about it in terms of the preponderance of the object, the world that we are coming to know, whether we're coming to know it through Shakespeare or through studying Cuba or through digitizing the archives or whatever, that world is much bigger than us. And we are just part of it. And our minds are not adequate to it. And that humility is something that I think we can bring to our classroom teaching. As I mentioned at the beginning, like often when you teach, you're teaching what you know, but you're constantly running up against what you don't know and don't understand. And in every science, there are places where there are limitations to what is understood, like what is dark matter? Well, what is the dark matter of the psyche? You know, what is the dark matter? What are the things that we don't understand? This part, okay, this phrase, preponderance of the object, undoubtedly clumsy to our ears, refers to the need for our thought, as well as Western philosophy in general, to come to terms with what it means that the object of our study is much greater than we are. There's more to the theory, but I'll tell you just how I experience it in teaching. In lecturing, to me, there's a kind of a beauty to it. The material allows you to diminish yourself, like much like the Vanna White example, but even more. It's a delusion that we maintain in this world that we as humans are somehow or other permanent, that we are central, and also, frankly, that we're separate, that we are like atoms bumping into each other. It's a terrible metaphor for what we actually really are. In fact, we're none of those. And the experience of teaching is one in which we don't actually stand separately from what we teach. This is kind of fun. We become what we teach. I am in every bit of me right now part of political theory. I am. You feel it. And that lack of separation between oneself and the other, between oneself and one's object of study, between oneself and one's world, is something that we need to continue to encounter. It's like what poetry is about, right? That there isn't a separation. And many other cultures have intrinsically understood that. When I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the moment there's an environmental theorist named Val Plumwood, and she was very experienced canoeist. She was in where was she? Was she in Australia? She was in some back place, back country. And she's like taking a canoe out, and because there'd been flooding recently, she didn't know she was in a part of the river that was dangerous, and she got attacked, brutally attacked by a crocodile. And she describes this moment in this article, which I highly recommend, called Being Prey. For a little while, I thought, when I was trying to write the lecture, I thought, is it Eat Prey? Only for the crocodile. But Being Prey, Eat Prey Love. Being Prey, she describes this moment of realizing that she, like all of her centering herself as human in a narrative, she's not that. She's prey. She's meat. And I think those kind of decentering experiences happen to us sometimes in Kant talked about the sublime, like the realization that we are just very limited on this planet. Her experience was physically and literally shattering, but it also, in it, she found herself completely decentered. So I love the humility of this repositioning of oneself at the margins of the capacity to comprehend the world. And I suggest that in teaching, we can and often do have moments in which we cultivate in ourselves and in our students a belief or a faith in something much greater than ourselves, whether that is justice, mathematics, the physical properties of stardust, the beauty of a work of literature, or the elegance of synapses in the brain. So it is always a rising above oneself, above the self, but also an invitation to students to do the same. I'm coming to the final of these points. I want to refer to that one as reverence. It just is a word that to me captures something that is kind of sacred in that space. The last one is there's a sentence that actually really rocked me when I first read Adorno. And again, I read him first as a graduate student. And the sentence, you'll read, it's one of the famous aphorisms of Adorno. It says, the need to lend a voice to suffering is a condition of all truth. The need to let suffering speak is a condition of all truth. I struggled for a long time with what that meant. I mean, surely there's truths that have nothing to do with suffering, but I think for Adorno, the suffering that's there in our society, we're led to just think it's just normal, that it's just background noise, that it's nothing that we have anything to do with, that, you know, human life is difficult, or, you know, I just had a flash in my brain of all those nature specials I watched, which inevitably a little animal got killed in, you know, suffering is normal. But in fact, what Adorno and his colleagues believed is that the suffering in the world is produced by us unnecessarily, and we actually have the ability to change it. Literally, we have enough food for everyone on the planet. Literally, we have enough resources for us all to live and to live well. And it's And therefore, the guidance that this aphorism gives us is to listen to those who have suffered, to hear what the suffering is, and to let that suffering speak and inform us. And I think that when we lecture, we're not just looking at the truth, we're looking at a truth that will make the world better. We're looking, I believe that most of us actually care. And that in caring, it's important to name what's wrong. There's a text I often used to teach when I taught the identity politics course, and it's by a woman who was an Indigenous woman, who taught it, who did her law degree at Queen's back before I got here, I think. Her name is Patricia Monture, and in this article, Monture is at a conference, a law conference for the first time, and people are trying to be inclusive and respectful, and they talk about Indigenous people and racialized people as disadvantaged. And at some point, she's just had it, and she stands up and says, "I have all kinds of advantages. I am not disadvantaged. What I am is dispossessed." And Indigenous people have been dispossessed. I mean, literally dispossessed of their land, dispossessed of their culture, dispossessed of their language, dispossessed of their traditions, dispossessed of their children. And it's a powerful moment because it's a moment of letting that suffering speak, of naming it, of listening to it, of recognizing that what that actually demands is not to hand out some advantages, not to create a program to include a couple more people. It's like to rethink what it means to have taken, to have dispossessed people. I'm wearing a shirt today. I'm very proud to say I was part of this project. It's called Stitch Their Names Together. The project is to embroider the names of every, they're up to about 50,000 names now, of every Palestinian who's been killed in the current conflict. There's a website, you can go look. I did a panel. On the panel, the women are all done in red, the men in black, and the children are green. And there are panels that are entirely green. The need to lend a voice to suffering is something that I think each of us can think about how we can do that. The need to turn the work that we do towards justice. And justice, in this case, it's about ethics, it's about repair. I don't like the word reconciliation. I like the word repair better. Okay. That's nearly it. There's a couple of additional things I want to say. One is this paradox. I've told you that you're unimportant, that it's all about like just looking at everything else. Obviously, you are very important. Obviously. And I think that we carry that. Like, obviously, the ways in which you're going to do these things will depend on you, your personality, your life experiences, the stories that you tell, the way in which you turn your work, your sense of humor, which hopefully some of the people in the class have. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that when I first wrote this lecture, a much longer version of it tried to actually move out of, more than I have, the sort of drawing on just the classics. These are starting points for bodies of thought that contain massive amounts of critique and expansion that have been done by people who are not, but by people who should be foregrounded. And so it's like a fault that I kept finding with myself in creating the lectures. I kept turning, I styled it around sort of three conventional political theorists and not around the work of, which I could have also done, Frantz Fanon, Stuart Hall, Patricia Williams. I threw in a little Patricia Monture for you, but like there's just so much out there that needs to be listened to and read. The final two things I want to say. First of all, you all already do this. I'm not giving you advice. I believe that and this lecture, these reflections are to honor what I think we all do. Like, I think we all go in and talk about in our own ways, about responsiveness, resistance. I think we all do that work of repair. I think we all are already kind of humble in our own ways. I hope that's true. And the other thing I would say is that we also all fail all the time. And again, in every category, it is hard work, and we are stymied in doing it. We are in particular prevented by features in our culture, which I've mentioned, and features in our economy, which I've mentioned, from doing this well. You can feel awfully vulnerable as the limitations of your own knowledge keep smacking you in the face, or your capacity to convey it. Maybe you've also lost your own desire to learn, or you feel like the needs of students these days are so far beyond what you can muster a response to. Maybe you're going through your own state of aporia, unsure anymore about what you know or believe. Maybe when it comes to lending a voice to suffering, your own shame about your own voice might get in the way. But if you manage to do even some of this, even some of the time, what I've talked about today, your students will learn. That's it. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I prepared a song for this occasion.
And I just also want to say that we had 40 more people watching online who are also figuratively standing. Thank you so much. We do have some time for questions, both from our folks online who are watching the live stream, as well as people in this room. I will be happy to run you a mic for your questions. And of course, as somebody who no longer is forced to do homework, I now enjoy it, and I have a reading list if anyone wants to also learn political studies based on the exciting things that you referenced that I've never heard of. As somebody who just did 18th century and knows nothing about this, I feel like I learned a lot. And yeah, thank you so much for your generosity in sharing that for those of us who haven't had the opportunity before to learn from you. Oh, there's so many questions. I'll start at the front just so that I save my legs.
Thank you so much. Thank you for not only, lecturing on what you know and sharing what you know, but sharing what obviously was a very emotional time for you. I think we could all see that and sense that for a number of reasons. And yeah. What I did want to say or ask is maybe about that paradox, because I really felt that as you were talking about it, in a way that when I first started my undergrad studies, sorry, I'm like feeling really emotional, but I came to this realization as like an early philosophy, scholar, that I was very small in the world. And it led to like a mental health crisis, of sorts. Also because I was reading Descartes and I was like afraid that little demons were running around every time like I showered. But I remember feeling very like alone in the world, like unsure that other people existed, like there was really a lot of that. And it created, just like a bit of a landscape for me where I just wasn't sure what to hang on to. And then as I went through life, and as life does, it gives you a number of experiences. And I remember coming to, the point where I was pregnant and thinking, I am not small. Like millions of women or people with uteruses have done this before, but this is the most special thing that's going on right now, you know? And so coming to grips with that and helping young people sort of through, you know, that push and pull or those tensions politically, but also just like personally. I wonder, and maybe for you as well, I just wonder if you have any further insights on that.
Well, there's certainly nothing like being a parent to let you know that other people exist. That I went through something similar when I read Nietzsche, to what you described with Descartes. And I remember writing my, when I took my second year political theory class, which was a kind of Plato to Nietzsche course, it concluded with Nietzsche, who at the time I just found devastating. Like just, I remember like during the exam, putting my head down on the desk, because I think we are affected by the ideas. And I think, you know, I was imagining a world in which, you know, part of mental health was that we learned to read what other people have gone through in terms of like intellectual challenges and how they tried to understand the world. I think I'm very moved by, I mean, the theorists that I read, in part because I read them in their biography. I know that Adorno was himself grappling for a lot of what he's writing with what it meant that people could be fascist. And I think we have to deal with that, right? Like, I think we have to deal with the way in which fascism tries to cope, I think, with people's sense of inadequacy by trying to create a philosophy that makes them feel that if they band together into these, like the word fascist comes from the word, Italian word for bundle. If we bundle together in this kind of unified thing, that we will be so unbreakable, right? That's the origin. And you know, there are very gentle ways in which we can support each other that don't involve fascism, that don't, you know, like that we can work closely with each other to support each other's needs. And I think, you know, again, like this whole thing, like we're denying that we are people who have needs. I think that's very, you know, fundamentally a bad aspect, toxic even aspect of our culture. And it's but it's hard to get around. You know, we're expected to be self-supporting and self-sustaining, and there's so many things in our culture that treat us, whether it's as consumers or as students, or whatever, as just kind of these monads. We will talk, I hope.
Thank you. Am I hearing? Okay, thank you. That was beautiful. That, in fact, was poetry. I want to ask you something as one recently retired professor to another. And this actually just popped into my head at the end of your talk. And it's that I have to start it with an anecdote. When I was thinking about retiring, talking about retiring with one of my mentors, former professor Roberta Hamilton, I said to her, when I think about not teaching, I think one of the things I'll miss is that moment that, you know, sometimes happens on a daily basis when you're reading something that happened in the news and you think, oh, what a great teaching moment that would make for the next Devs 100 lecture on blah, blah, blah. She said, yeah, I know what you mean. Jeff Smith, her late, also retired professor, Jeff Smith, her partner, used to say to her, I really miss that. And I said to her, so what did he do about it? And she said, he gave me the lecture over breakfast, which I try very hard not to do. But what do you do with this as a very recently retired professor?
Yeah. Where do we take this? Well, I mean, I did and have thanked these folks for giving me the opportunity to just keep on talking. I do actually identify, everybody who knows me knows this, so strongly as a teacher. Like, it's just kind of what I do. yeah, I honestly, Karen, I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't found it. And I do actually have lots of times. There's so much I don't miss about this place. How you doing? Like really, um, I don't miss, but I do miss the interactions with students, and there are moments, uh, in lecturing where I go places I didn't know I could go. Something occurs, and I love, it's kind of like magic, and I miss that. Um, but life is short. I wish also that in retiring, somebody had come along behind me who taught this, like somebody in political studies who would teach, what I think like needs to be taught, and not, they wouldn't teach it the same way, they wouldn't teach the same theorists, but we are working at a time when we're not being replaced. And so like some of the comfort of knowing somebody else who's going to do that job is now gone for us. And for some of us, it's like, okay, so you're gonna have a medical faculty and nobody's gonna teach you about bones. I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna go okay. We need people to teach all of the things, and so it's hard. Um, there's, yeah, I've thought about places to volunteer. I was talking with somebody the other day, who's a student, um, at King's College in Halifax, and they run a humanities program that is just for the community, right? That's just basically they get profs to teach people who would never come to university. We did that for a little while. It was an initiative here at Queens. It was called Free Queens. And so maybe some of us retired folks could talk about like just putting together a little lecture series like that. Talk to the people at King's College about how it's done. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. This reminds me of Back to the Future. In other words, 50 years ago, I taught chalk and blackboard. Then I went to slides teaching. And then I went to PowerPoint computing. Now development on online teaching. And unfortunately, now it's going into AI. The very fundamental question here is, what's the teaching and learning outcome in terms of that presentation? That's one aspect. Right now, I'm developing learner-directed education. In other words, having the learners go through the process of thinking, developing, and teaching.
I mean, the world of pedagogy is not really my world, because there are a ton of things that go on, studies, empirical studies, to test how well people learn. So I did reference the one cognitive neuroscientist who was doing work to see that in fact the introduction of technology and AI, like handing every child an iPad, does not actually enhance their learning nor their general cognitive abilities. It isn't even just what they learn, right? The other thing is, as I said earlier too, I'm kind of like, we don't know what we're teaching sometimes. Like maybe you can go away from this lecture and somebody say, oh, well, I learned something about like, I don't know, responsibility and redress or something. Redress. That was also going to be, at one point they were all R's: response, resilience. It's like the 6 R's or the 7 R's. The thing about, I also, of course, learner directed learning is great. Sometimes people don't know what they need to learn or want to learn. That, I often think that the best way of learning is to just like have somebody walk around and ask questions, right? Like you can just follow somebody who you need to learn from and just ask them, kind of like Dan's supervision. I am just teasing. I know you don't mind. I also just think that sometimes there's something to be said for teacher-directed learning, in a sense. Like I remember there was a student in our department, this is like decades ago, who was studying, she was doing work on an indigenous community. She was doing research up north, and I apologize, I don't remember which community it was, but she discovered once she went there that it was rude to ask questions. It was rude within that community or that culture, and that the respectful thing to do was to wait until an elder told you. And so it would be up to the elder to decide when you were ready to learn things. Another thing that I did when I was preparing for this lecture, there's a whole part of it that had to do with storytelling. because I love stories as a way of teaching. I also just love stories, just plain stories. So I did, and my computer broke yesterday, so I don't have all my notes. And so I was watching a woman who is I think her last name is Anderson, and she runs the program on Indigenous pedagogy at UBC. She's like the vice dean or something of that program. And she was talking about storytelling and storytelling as a mode of learning where often the story has to be adjusted according to the audience. Like the same story can be used in different settings to teach different things. And also you can change what the story says too. So in terms of like Back to the Future, I have always just loved the least amount of technology, both because technology breaks, as did my computer screen yesterday. Thank you. And then also because I think that like PowerPoint is you can see there's lots of reasons, my handwriting being among them, why PowerPoint is a good idea. But apparently, in people who studied it, show that even an hour after the lecture, if they've received a lecture like this and a lecture with a PowerPoint, they will remember less with the PowerPoint, even though the PowerPoint is beautiful. And yeah, so anyway, lots of things to think about. Maybe just one more question. Is that
One more question? Of course.
Hi, Eleanor.
okay?
I'm very sorry to hear about Paul Kelly. We taught for a couple of years together at Loyalist and drove back and forth every day. And so I'll reach out to Susan this afternoon. Thank you for making me aware of that. What in the course of your career have you changed your mind?
Well, I'd like to think I have become, I mean, the first and maybe glib answer is I change my mind all the time. I hope. That's the famous quote from James Maynard Keynes when he was asked why he changed his mind. He said, when circumstances change, I change my mind. The less glib answer is I think I'm a more generous reader than I used to be. I think as a graduate student, I often felt that in order to feel confident, I had to be more critical. And I think I am, I hope, really hope, I'm a more generous reader, listener, and student of others than I was at the beginning. Although I like to think of myself as being not evil at any time.
Maybe we can do one more round of applause. Before my follow-up announcements, I do just want to make sure to tell everyone that we will be having an informal little celebration get-together at the CTL right after this. We have some refreshments. If you're not familiar, the CTL is in MacCory F200, which is across from the cafeteria and the water fountains with the now defunct sparkling water fountain. So that is my point of reference since I'm not good at geography or whatever that is. So first and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. Eleanor MacDonald. As well as Drs. Jonathan Rose and Dan Venna. Jesse Kimber at ITS helped us when these cameras were not working a few days ago and ensured that we could have this live streamed so that people online could also benefit from enjoying and learning from this lecture. And lastly, everyone at the CTL who has been able to help with the both visible and invisible labor that makes these things possible, especially Dr. Yasmin Jerbal, who first said we should do a last lecture series. And I want to reach out to Eleanor. And Dr. Mevish Rather, who did all the things I don't understand to make our programs happen. And lastly, I do want to say that this is our first event in May's Teaching and Learning Month, and some upcoming events that we really hope to see you at Our next Tuesday's Showcase of Teaching and Learning, where we also have some retiring profs sharing some of their teaching innovations. We have a keynote with Dr. Danny Liu on May 26th, which is hybrid. And then on June 3rd, we have an AI in Teaching and Learning forum with tons of instructors and educators sharing some of their assessments and ideas to integrate and mitigate AI use. So thank you all so much for coming today. And we hope to see you all the time forever, even if you retire. Thank you.